Hey everybody, Mark here, reliving the American Revolution. I received a lot of comments on YouTube from the students in Mr. Griffin's class up at the Bart School in Adams, Mass. And two of the questions dealt with the camp wives and the camp ladies. Some of them were not wives, they were girlfriends. And the other dealt with the Army when they were on board ships. So first I'm going to talk about the camp ladies. The camp ladies were, as I said, wives or girlfriends of men in the Army. And they were, it just wasn't the Continental Army, it was the British Army as well as the Hessian Army. And these ladies would follow wherever the army went. The ladies would follow, and it was not an easy life. They didn't just sit around and kibitz. They worked extremely hard, and they did everything that the army didn't have a soldier do, which was practically everything except for cleaning guns and stuff like that. And I'm sure that some of them did that. Um, Nowadays, the Army has people for everything, as does the Navy and the Air Force. They have people that do quartermastering. They have people that do secretarial stuff, and they have little job codes for all of these people. Well, during the Continental Army, the Revolutionary War times, uh, the camp ladies did these things, and they did everything but cooking, which I thought was quite strange. They did not cook. The army provided cooks to make the food, but they did laundering, they did sewing, they did washing clothes, and they did nursing. Um, they herded the cattle, they herded the sheep, they drove the wagons sometimes. During battles, they would do their nursing right up on the front lines. They'd be dodging bullets and they'd be running canteens of water and pitchers of water, which is where we got Maui pitcher from. The guys, it was hot that day. It was over 100 degrees, and they're all wearing wool uniforms. And they would yell, Maui pitcher, meaning bring me some water. And that's where the name came from. Her real name wasn't Pitcher, but that's how she was dubbed. And so these ladies would guard the baggage in the wagons when it was moving, um, and most of the time they were limited to working within the platoon or the squad that their husband or boyfriend was in. It wasn't a camp-wide thing. Although some of them did have enterprising businesses making uniforms for guys and things of that nature, and so they were pretty famous also for their commandeering, and when there was scavenging to be done, they were very good at it because that's how they got extra material and buttons and things like that they needed. They would scavenge it from the battlefields and such. They were subject to the military law, and so if they violated that law, they were punished, and punished severely in some cases, as were the husbands. The husbands were that had their wives and their girlfriends there. They had a very strict code put on them, and in fact, there was one incident where a husband abused his wife, was caught and was taken to court martial, and he received lashings, 30 lashings, which was pretty painful. Basically, he was whipped 30 times. So they shared, the camp ladies shared all the hardships that the men did. If there was no food, there was no food. If there was no shelter, they didn't have shelter. If the weather was bad, the snow was deep, they slept and they camped in that snow. You see the pictures of Valley Forge where the guys are trotting in knee deep snow with no shoes on. A lot of the camp ladies were subjected to the exact same thing. They had one thing that they were subjected to that the men were not, and that was childbirthing. Uh, these ladies gave birth to children while they were in these camps, and sometimes it was pretty brutal. There's one letter that I read about a lady who was returning to Boston and gave birth in the Berkshire Mountains and in the back of a wagon, and they just continued on. It's pretty impressive. These women were, and so and as I said, they were exposed to battle as well because they got out there and they helped wherever necessary. So that's the camp ladies. They were a pretty hardy bunch of women. One of the other questions that I got is, what was it like to be in the army and be on a ship? And it wasn't very. It was almost never that the Continental Army got on a ship. It was mostly the British, and the Army, when they embarked on a ship, did very little. They did some drilling and they stayed down below. It was very crowded. Um, they had minor rations, and it was hard for them. They weren't allowed to do anything. And as most sailors will tell you, if you're on board and you don't know what to do, you're just getting in the way. And that's what would happen with these soldiers. So they pretty much just stayed out of the way and stayed in their quarters or their barracks or whatever it was that they were assigned to. But it wasn't very hard for them as so for the sailors. And so I think tomorrow we're going to talk about privateers. We're going to talk about serving on board a British man of war. The Continental Navy only had about 24 ships. And so we're going to talk all about that tomorrow. So I hope this answers a couple of the questions, and we'll see you tomorrow.